Hey you people, this is Aaron. We're now on to the second video where we're going to focus in a little more on animation. This may be a little longer video, but I'm going to try to keep it short. We're trying to combine several principles, several things that we need to think about while talking about animation. And so hopefully this helps you, and it combines, well, just things that you have to think about as you're working with animation. Well, let's just start. So this is a geometry again that we're going to be using for the Quell engine, or at least the base geometry. We'll be adding a little more to it later. And you know, whenever it comes to creating an animation, it's really just kind of like the flip book thing where you have one line that goes a little bit further, a couple of lines that go a little bit, you know, and it looks like motion. So what we could do is we could take and we could render this, just come over here and render out a PNG or whatever kind of file, a JPEG, and then we could rotate it. You hit the R and lock it to the Z axis, and then we could rotate it just a little more. Well, not that much, but we could do that by hand, and then we could set it there, and then we could rotate it. And we could do that if we were, you know, really into that kind of thing and had a lot of time and didn't mind the errors that we would probably introduce by doing it by hand. But instead, there's a much easier way to do it. We can actually animate kind of in an automated fashion. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to use keyframes, and keyframes allow us to define the major points, and then it's going to automate the intermediate frames. And it's so nice that we can do this, but that's how we're going to do it. So something that you need to think about up front as you're working with animations is, first off, how many frames do you want per second? The more frames per second, it means the more renders you're going to have to do. It also means probably if you're working with sprite sheets that you're going to have a larger sprite sheet to deal with. And so there's things to consider. And of course, frame per second, you know, would just exactly as it sounds. Say this is 1 second worth of media. And if you're doing 4 frames per second, it's going to look something like this. You have a frame, 2 frames, 3 frames, 4 frames, and then it's going to go on up. You know, a lot of people are doing 12 frames per second for their sprite sheet. I'm not going to count to 12. Let's just pretend this is 12. And then what we're actually going to be doing here in this video are 24 frames per second. If you were using 4 frames per second, it's going to look like you're trying to animate using a PowerPoint slideshow. It's not going to be very good. 12 frames is about the base where animations are passable and they stop looking like slideshows and you start to get animated movement. But 24 frames per second is good, but we will probably want to, as a result, we're probably going to end up shrinking this down just a little to make sure that we can get it on a sprite sheet. But we're going to worry about that later. For now, we're just going to animate at 24 frames per second. Now, another thing to consider is what all animations do you need from your object. And for this guy, what we're going to be doing for our Quell engine, and I have, let's just show here. We have a spin up sequence and we have a spinning sequence, and then it kind of slows down. Now, all that's happened really fast, but all of that's in there. And that's what we want, is we want a spin up sequence, we want a spinning sequence, and then we're going to have it slow down. And so those are 3 sequences. They're going to be a second a piece, and at 24 frames per second, we're looking at 72 frames. And so that's where we're going to be setting our end to. We'll set it at 72. So if you notice here on your timesheet, that brings us down to 72. You can hover over that. I think if you hit, nope. Anyways, we'll worry about that later. But this kind of shows you where you're at in your movie sequence rendering. This tells you the current frame. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to go to our object, make sure it's selected and it alone. We're going to go to our object and see how the rotation's set 0, 0, 0. That's exactly where we want it. No location is where we set it. And so we're going to right click here. We're going to insert a keyframe. Okay, so we have one frame here. And now we're going to have 3 sequences. And so the next one is at 24 because we have 24 frames per second. But we're actually going to go one up to 25. The reason we're going to do this is because we're going to rotate to 360 degrees, and we want that to be back in to make a complete spin at the 25th frame. Because imagine for our next sequence we wanted it to be in this position. Well, if we have the 24th frame in this position and the 25th frame in this position, that's 2 frames at this position. We don't want that. We want a smooth transition. And so we're going to end on the 25th frame. And so here we're going to set this rotation to 360. That's one full rotation. And pick another axis if you're following along with this tutorial. I like it to spin on 2 axes if you axi, I don't know. But if you do 3, I just don't like the way it looks. And so now we're going to drop another keyframe. So what's nice now is watch this rotation over here as we navigate through the frames. 359, 354. It's automating that. And we don't have to do it. So if you come back here to the beginning and hit your play, it's going to navigate without us having to do it, or it's going to rotate without us having to do anything. And of course, once it gets this keyframe, because we haven't set any other keyframes, it's going to stop. But that's pretty cool. If you don't agree with that, then I don't know. I really question what you think is pretty cool. So we're going to go to keyframe now. Instead of 48, we're going to go to 49. So that first sequence, that gets it spinning up. Now at frame 49, we really want it to be in the full swing of things. It's really going to be moving along. And so I want it to go through 2 full rotations by this point. So that's 360 times 2 is 720. On top of this 360, we're going to put 1080. Okay. Now, make sure you're there on where you want it. We're going to insert the keyframe again. And so now if we go back, it's going. Now it's going to hit this point, frame 24, and now it really starts taking off. And then once it hits this point, notice it slows down on its own, and it just stays there. That's because we haven't set our stop keyframe. So now we're going to go again to 73. That's one past where we're going to stop, and we're going to add another 360 degrees. And notice it doesn't have to be within your range of frames for you to go there and add a keyframe to it. It's all used for the calculations. And so 1440 is another 360 degrees. Okay. So what that does is we go through the first 24 frames at 1 rotation. We go through the next 24 frames at 2 rotations. And then as we're slowing down, and this is where we're going to render our spin down sequence, it goes through 1 more rotation, but it comes to a rest at that. So we'll just look at that. So we're spinning up here. It's going to go a little faster here at twice the speed, and then it's going to hit our next frame, well, you see I messed up there. I put our keyframe right here where it's going, but I need to go back here to, that was 49. That's 1080. I forgot to set the keyframe, so go to 73. Right click, insert keyframes. Now, prepare to be amazed. And so it starts to slow down on its own, which is nice. Okay, so, and it will auto repeat there. We're going to stop it here. So that's our basic animation. If you want to see how it looks in rendering, you can hit the 0 key and hit play. No, this isn't truly rendering. It's still the object mode. You can switch this over to I'm lying. Here you would switch to rendered, and it'll take well, what's going on here? Okay, well, we're not going to worry about this right now. We'll come back to it later. Maybe because I need cycles rendering. Yeah, that's what we need. So cycles rendering, we come in on the camera view. It's going to look something like this. Now, we're going to worry about our lighting and everything else a little bit. We're going to switch back here to, what were we at? Solid. Okay, and go back to the beginning. Okay, so this is the basics of using your keyframes to animate. We're going to change a little bit more here, but one thing I want to show you in case you happen to mess up, and we'll do more in the next video. If you happen to mess up and you want to remove keyframes or you want to move keyframes around, one way of doing that is here through the dope sheet. Just switch this view over here to the dope sheet, and kind of with like you did with the others, for selecting, you can hit B for box select, and you can drag it around the keyframes you want. Actually, you see how these are all yellow? If you hit A, that unselects them all. So say, well, I need to remove these keyframes here. You could actually use the box selector, B, drag a region around it. That will select those, and you could delete those. We're not going to do that, but if you need to do that, that's where it's at. So that's all for this video. We'll pick up more in the next video on animation and also adding a little more to the Quell engine, some of the materials to it. All right, thanks for watching.